I'm sure all of you have heard of the infamous Toby Fox Fever Dream story by now. Following the summer of 2011, Toby began working on a new project based on his dream, starting from knowing nothing about game development. This wouldn't faze him, as he was determined to bring his idea to life, eventually creating and releasing Undertale. What? You thought I was gonna say Deltarune? No, that was way later, and in fact, there's more things separating both games than connecting them. But why was Undertale created first, if it bears no resemblance to the current story of Deltarune? To understand what led up to the creation of Deltarune, we need to go back and see what Toby Fox's life was like at this point, before Undertale released. Fresh from graduating out of Central High School in 2010, Toby was now starting a new chapter for his life in university. Following this, he would be invited to attend Camp Fangamer, planting the seed and fostering a long-standing relationship, which will become more relevant later on in years to come. Toby is a creative person who loves writing, but also is incredibly passionate for cult classic games, namely Earthbound and the Toyo Project. Franchises which would go on to influence Toby's work in some shape or form, either subtly through the story and humor, or more blatantly through gameplay mechanics, such as Touhou's bullet hell segments and Moon Remix RPG's impact of player choice. All of this led up to one fateful night in 2011. When Toby was away from home during college, he got sick with a high fever, and had the most vivid vision for the ending of a game he needed to bring to life. The most interesting part about the story relating to dreams is how they're all in one way or another related to everything you've experienced before. Toby's fever dream was a surreal blend of all his favorite stories and games stitched into one evocative narrative, something that truly spoke out to him on a deeper level. The stage was set for a masterpiece, but the hardest part was putting all this into practice. We don't know the full details regarding Toby's dream, or how much pop culture influenced it, but looking back, it's clear he was already wrestling with the same themes which people loved about his work: choice, consequence, and freedom. While Undertale is a commentary on the power of choice and companionship, Deltarune would split off in its own lane, flipping this concept and experimenting with the lack of freedom and control. Back in 2012, Toby Fox drafted the very first version of Deltarune, and it's safe to say it would have been a completely different game. But even in the game's early stages, core themes and ideas stuck. For example, characters from the artist Canatines on Tumblr survived all the way into the final product, and even parts of the script. Still, a lot of potential ideas were considered and thrown out during this era, with one notable example brought up on Undertale's 6th year anniversary stream.
Also, originally, to increase contrast, I considered having everybody be humans in the light world, and only become monsters in the dark world, but for a lot of reasons we didn't do that.
Toby would continue development, writing scripts and making sprites, but the premise of trying to develop a game the scale of Deltarune with zero experience was a near impossible feat. Toby realized this and decided to shift gears for a moment, transitioning to a simpler title, something which wasn't as complicated game dev-wise. In 2013 to 2014, Toby had set up camp in Andrew Hussey's basement, the creator of Homestuck, to finish his work for the series, while also beginning development on Undertale, working on sprites, music, and writing, launching the Kickstarter, which easily exceeded its goal. Undertale was more of a completely different game, designed to be an experiment of sorts, to test the waters to how an audience would react to such an experimental and different indie title. And also as a way to build confidence and experience to eventually tackle adapting the fever dream into game form. Moving on to 2015, when Undertale released, it instantly redefined indie gaming forever, and overnight became a cultural phenomenon.
Oh, no.
I think I did. Who helped me?
Oh my fucking god.
What the hell?
Oh, there we go. Our first fight by ourselves.
I won't go over what Undertale is, as I'm sure all of you already have a basic understanding of the RPG where you don't have to fight anyone. But with the added context of Deltarune, we can go back and see how many parallels there were in Undertale, along with early versions of concepts or themes which would later be expanded in Deltarune. As I mentioned prior, Undertale was Toby Fox's way of dipping his toes in the water before fully committing to working on the expansive world of Deltarune. It was where he initially told emotional stories for characterization, and where he originally toyed with player choice and impact. The more obvious examples he could point to Toby testing out initial concepts include the shared characters and soundtrack callbacks. Certain soundtracks were originally intended for Deltarune in 2014, and were put in Undertale. Examples include songs like Heartache, which was intended for a really early Jevil fight, originally titled Joker Fight, along with the original Rude Buster being Bone Truzzle. This is more obviously done for leitmotifs that connect concepts and songs together to represent an overarching message. But then we move on to the deeper side of things, which were initially tried in Undertale and more thoroughly expanded upon in Deltarune. For example, the battle system and the meta fourth wall breaking aspects of the game regarding the player. The battle system in Undertale was about as bare bones of a system as you could get. Each turn, you can use one of the 4 buttons to perform an action, before dodging attacks from the enemy like you would in a bullet hell style game. Compared to standard RPGs, it was a fresh approach, adding skill and player input. It was a very simplistic novel experience, limited by the simplicity of the gameplay loop. After all, you could only have so much witty dialogue, soul colors, and interesting bullet pans for boss fights before the novelty wore off. Toby was very limited in his ability to do something special and create memorable boss fights with the current fighting system. And you could really see the moments in which Toby tried his hardest to push the limits of the fighting system he built in the Sans or Azrael boss fight to create something which stood out for these more impactful characters. In Deltarune's case, there is so much more headroom for enemies' personalities and identity to be reflected within the battle. The way each fight requires a nuanced approach to spare an enemy through specific skill-based minigames adds such a deeper level of expression into each character, which is nearly unheard of in Undertale. Deltarune creates a much more gripping experience, not only through the added dynamics of the party system and TP bullet grazing, but the way you need to readjust your approach to nearly every encounter. Sparing an enemy evolved past just using the act button and became a whole minigame in itself, and even the way you receive instant feedback with actions from a spare going towards a visible spare meter quantifying your progress makes for a much more cohesive and tighter gameplay loop. The list of improvements over Undertale's fighting system go on and on. It's undeniable the way Deltarune's battles operate are way more engaging, satisfying, and emphasize all the best parts about Undertale's version. While the battle system in Undertale was overall objectively improved in Deltarune, the fourth wall breaking elements represented in Deltarune feel more like a testimony to Toby's improved writing and execution. More specifically, the part about making players guilty about their decisions. Snowgrave feels like the spiritual successor to Undertale's genocide route. The gameplay is designed to punish the player emotionally, when you, the player, manipulate Noelle to harm enemies through her childhood friend, reinforcing the theme of control, but more importantly, the player's guilt. In Genocide, you at least had the courtesy of putting everyone out their misery, and there wasn't any consequence for anyone stopping you from killing, for the most part. But what if the characters you mercilessly attacked did fight back, and did try to fix the damages you caused? This is what happens in Deltarune. The game becomes less of a monster killing spree, and more like you, the player, sadistically trying to disrupt the lives of as many people as possible. Unlike Genocide and Undertale, Deltarune actively pushes back against your actions. Most notably, with Chris rushing Birdly to the hospital after Snowgrave, and punishing the player after putting the Thorn Ring on Noelle. The gameplay of Snowgrave just feels unsatisfying, in the way you aren't truly progressing story-wise or leveling up. An emotion not as present during the Genocide route. Where Undertale's Genocide was more about simply chasing a different ending under a what-if premise, Snowgrave instead becomes less about trying to experience all there is about the game through secret bosses, and more about intentionally trying to derail the main storyline. In Deltarune, Toby Fox really nailed down the themes of player guilt in a way which is thematically appropriate, but improves upon his approach from Genocide. While Snowgrave and Genocide routes meta themes explored player agency, Toby also experimented with mysterious story threads, such as Gaster, which foreshadowed Deltarune's deeper narrative integration. Gaster always was a bit of a loose thread. His existence and placement felt more deliberate rather than coincidental with how it aligned with other themes of the story, such as different universes, the broken lab machine, and the Goners. Personally, I believe this was Toby initially testing audience perception to such an ambiguous and mysterious character in his game. His inclusion is so secretive that a majority of people who played the game never even encounter him. Most of the information about him requires digging in the game's files or modifying source code. Nonetheless, his inclusion was intentional. This brings us to Deltarune, where the character of Gaster undeniably has much more of a presence in the storyline. He still takes more of a backseat like in Undertale, but now his encounters are part of the main story and aren't something you need to actively hunt for. This finally gave audiences the recognition Gaster deserved since 2015. Even after Undertale released with its expansive story and novel gameplay, fans still craved more from Toby. He already caught lightning in a bottle once for Undertale, but how would you follow that up in your next game? Fans were already anticipating a second game from Toby all the way back as early as the Undertale Kickstarter, but even then, nobody was prepared for what Toby had in store next. Toby teased early hints at his new project after Undertale as early as 2015 on Twitter, with one example being a set of tweets mentioning darkness. To any Deltarune fan, I'm sure alarm bells are already ringing for you, but for Undertale fans at this point, the topic of a new game in the Undertale universe was a very contentious subject, as many fans felt a second game was unnecessary and would detract from the original story-wise if it was made in the same universe. Discourse surrounding a new game was rising in popularity. Toby would contribute to this by alluding to a new project in his tweets, being very cryptic surrounding the project, going so far as privately asking a fan site to not use the Deltarune domain. Following this incident, a Twitter user asked Toby if the website Deltarune.com was official and got no reply. A day after this, on December 9th, 2015, the Deltarune website would update for the first time, including an image titled Him, with a passage of wingdings translating to, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting," directly quoting Gaster. Instead of overtly teasing and announcing everything, Toby instead opted to keep things on the low, hiding teasers in plain sight. Fans would theorize about what this all meant. Fast forward to 2016 July, the website mysteriously gets updated with a new passage in Wingdings, reading, "Free heroes appeared at World's Edge," a direct quote from the Legend of Deltarune. And as early as next month, the passage would get updated once again, reading, "Free heroes appeared to banish the angels' heaven," another reference to the Legend of Deltarune. All of this would seemingly stay buried in the niche sides of the community, namely those a part of the Dreamer.com fan site. So it was clear to fans Toby was at least working on something, but few people even knew about everything that was teased by Toby up to this point. Even a later Tumblr post by SaveLoad Reset on September of the same year didn't mention the Deltarune.com website, illustrating how obscure it was to the general Undertale community. SaveLoad Reset did, however, pick up on all the darkness imagery associated with WD Gaster when discussing the premise of a new game from Toby, and it's interesting to see how fans connected the dots and what they got right. For example, the blogger theorized that Gaster would have a much more integral role in the next game, which according to the recent chapters is true, and even predicted Chara would be the main protagonist. I mean, they're both wearing the same shirt, wield a knife, and have red eyes, so they're basically the same character. However, instead of riding out the success of Undertale, Toby was busy working tirelessly with close members of his team, sketching up designs for characters as early as 2015, composing music such as TV World in 2016, and developing the first chapter of Deltarune, unbeknownst to the general public. This would all lead up to one pivotal day on Halloween Eve, when the official Undertale Twitter account was hijacked, presumably by Gaster, as part of the Deltarune rollout. The next day, Deltarune was released, but it wasn't called that. Instead, it was titled Survey Program with a whole cryptic launch process, throwing users straight into a character selection screen, and I'm sure you know the rest.
Chris. God.
My name's Chris?
Initially, many people saw this game as Undertale 2. However, it was very clear in both its gameplay and story that this wasn't meant to be a sequel, and with the release of Chapter 2 in 2021, Deltarune was able to carve its own identity within the Undertale universe. It's incredibly interesting to see the journey Deltarune took to reach this point, and honestly, I'm glad it took that long to release, as we wouldn't have gotten such an ambitious, emotionally driven, and well-designed game if it wasn't for Undertale. In a way, we wouldn't have Undertale without Deltarune, and vice versa, along with the fact that both games technically came from the same fever dream. It's just that one more explicitly follows it compared to the other. I'm honestly really excited to see the direction the game will go, given how much of a lasting impression the dream left on Toby for him to want to dedicate years of his life developing it. Speaking of dedication, nothing screams more dedication than fan-created mods. And if you want to learn about the history of Deltarune fan-created mods, you can click on the video on screen.